We've been doing this series in Proverbs for the last 2 months, and this morning we are coming to an end of the series. I hope you've also been reading along in the book of Proverbs with the guide that we gave you. And even if you fell off somewhere or you weren't able to finish the whole thing, I really encourage you to continue reading the book of Proverbs. Even beyond the various themes and topics we've talked about in these last few weeks, I hope that every one of us will make wisdom one of the main goals of our lives. Right? That I want to be wise. Lord, give me wisdom. And of course, Proverbs is so helpful with so much wisdom, so much insight, very practically for life. And so this is a list of the various topics that we've talked about in the last number of weeks in the book of Proverbs. And by the way, all of these messages are on our websites. They're also on the YouTube channel for our church. If you missed any of them or if you want to hear any of them again, you can go there. We've talked about wisdom. We've talked about decision making. We've talked about diligence and hard work. We've talked about friendships. We've talked about family relationships. We've talked about the words that we speak. We talked about humility. And last Sunday, we talked about money. And, as I was looking back at this list, the way that we chose these topics was based on what are the main things that Proverbs itself talks about. Okay, what are the main themes in the book of Proverbs? But then as I was looking back at this list, I realized these are the main things that we are struggling with, the main problems that we have, the main issues that we think about even today, isn't it? And it just reminded me that the Bible, at least the book of Proverbs, is 3,000 years old, right? But the world is still the same, issues are still the same, and the Bible has this eternal, ongoing relevance for us. It has so much wisdom to give us on all the topics and all the issues and struggles that we have even today in life. And this morning, we want to talk about one last topic from the book of Proverbs. Again, it's a big one, I'm sure, for all of us, and that is the topic of anger. Anger. And so we know that this is one of the dominant characteristics of the world that we live in, the society that we live in, the culture that we live in. I remember reading a survey or some poll that was taken maybe a few years ago now that said that 40% of Indians lose their temper at least once a day. 40% of Indians lose their temper at least once a day, and I'm sure if that statistic is a few years old, that it would be even higher now. And this is not just people out there, obviously. This is also people in here, very much, most likely all of us. We're angry people. We live in an angry world. It's actually very scary to think about. How do we deal with our anger? And even before that, how do we even think about anger? People, if you ask them, if you talk to them, even people here probably, you get all different kinds of opinions about anger, right? Anger itself, is it right? Is it wrong? Is it good? Is it bad? Some people will say that anger is always bad. You should stuff your anger. Never be angry. Other people would say, no, it's good to let your emotions out. Some people would probably also say that unless you get angry sometimes, nothing ever happens. You need to get angry to get the job done. How do we even think about anger? I see some nods on that last point. Right? How do we think about anger? And thankfully, again, God's Word, and particularly the book of Proverbs, so much wisdom, right, to help us to navigate through all these things. So, first thing we're going to look at this morning, the basic perspective that Proverbs has on anger. How should we even think about anger? Then we'll talk about what's a solution to anger. And then finally, how do we, very practically, control, manage our anger? Okay, so first thing, Proverbs' basic perspective on anger. How should we even think about anger? And the first thing, 2 things here. First thing that we need to see, in the book of Proverbs and throughout the Bible, there is such a thing as righteous anger. there is such a thing as righteous anger. And we're going to see in a moment the book of Proverbs generally frowns upon anger. Generally, the assessment of anger that Proverbs has is negative. However, there's one person that gets very angry in the book of Proverbs, and that anger is considered good. Right? Do you know who that person is? Obviously. Right? It's God. Right? I'll show you some of the verses in Proverbs here. Proverbs 22:14. The mouth of an adulterous woman is a deep pit. A man who is under the Lord's wrath falls into it. Wrath. That's deep. Anger. Right? God has it. It's good. It's righteous. It's right. It's just. Proverbs 24:17-18. Do not gloat when your enemy falls, when they stumble. Do not let your heart rejoice, or the Lord will see and disprove and turn his wrath away from them. God's wrath is good. It's right. It's always used in the best way. Proverbs 11:23. The desire of the righteous ends only in good, the hope of the wicked only in wrath. God judges the wicked. It's a good thing. Proverbs 11:4. In fact, we saw this last week when we were talking about money. Wealth is worthless in the day of wrath. There is a day coming. God is going to pour out his wrath. Okay? So, over and over again in the book of Proverbs, in fact, throughout the Bible, God is talked about as angry. God has wrath. It's genuine. In fact, you could say the angriest person in the Bible, do you know who it is? It's God. Right? The Bible repeatedly talks about God's anger, his wrath, and, by the way, this is not just an Old Testament thing. Okay, it's not just God the Father who gets angry. Look at Mark chapter 3, verses 1-6. It says, another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone. Then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But they remained silent. Now note this. He looked around at them in what? In anger, and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Right? It's not just God the Father in the Old Testament who gets angry. Jesus, God in the flesh, as he's walking around, he gets angry. And what is he angry about, by the way? He's angry about the hypocrisy, mainly of the religious leaders, the pride, the stubbornness, the lack of compassion. And you remember the same thing happens when he's in the temple. Do you remember that? He goes into the temple, which is supposed to be a house of prayer. He sees it as a big marketplace of money-making and profits and business. And Jesus says, this is not right. He overturns the tables of the money changers. He's angry. He's furious. In fact, another place where the Bible talks about Jesus getting angry, very interesting, very different kind of situation. John chapter 11, you can look it up later. That's when, you remember, Lazarus, Jesus' friend, dies, and Jesus goes to his house to raise him from the dead. But it says that before he raises him, Jesus, now there's this word that's used apparently in the Greek. It's a very different kind of word, and very often in English, it's translated that he was deeply moved in his spirit, he was troubled, something like that. But that word is actually used mainly of horses, and it's talking about the snorting of horses. And it says that Jesus did this. And when it's talking about human beings doing this, it's talking about a deep kind of anger. What is Jesus angry about that time? Well, seems like he's angry about sin. He's angry about death. He's angry about suffering. These are alien invasions in this good, perfect world that God has created. And it makes Jesus, apparently, angry. Right? And so there is such a thing as righteous anger. In fact, people have said that anger is something like an inner righteousness meter, like a justice gauge that God has put inside each one of us, right? And when we read about, when we watch, when we hear about injustice and corruption and selfishness and greed, when we are victims of these things ourselves, right, our righteousness meter goes, it kind of spikes, and it says, this is wrong. This is unacceptable. Something needs to be done about this. Just little hints of righteous anger, right? The kind that God has, the kind that Jesus had. In fact, somebody has said that anger is basically defending what you love. That's very interesting if you just think about that. I think it's very helpful. Anger is defending what you love, right? And that's true. Something is wrongly being attacked, something is wrongly being abused, something is corrupted. You move. It moves you, right, to action. And in fact, you could even go so far as to say that if you never get angry, at least feel that emotion inside of you. We'll talk about the expression of that emotion in a moment. But if you never feel that, right, even in the face of injustice and greed and selfishness and all the horrible things that go on in the world, right, there's something wrong. Right? That means you don't really love, right? You're just unaffected. You're not bothered. You don't care. Right? There is such a thing as righteous anger. Okay, in fact, I think this is why it says, Psalm 4:4, also quoted in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, it says, in your anger, do not sin. Apparently, there's a way to be angry without sinning. Right? There is such a thing as righteous anger. Now, before you get too excited about that and feel very justified for all your temper tantrums and all the times you get angry and before you start defending yourself and feeling proud, right, there's a second thing. Okay, there is such a thing as righteous anger. However, please note, our anger is never fully righteous. There is such a thing as righteous anger. We never attain it ourselves. Okay, we never get there. Right? Our anger is always distorted in some way or another. Right? And in fact, Proverbs, whenever it talks about our anger, it has every time something negative to say about it. In fact, not even just negative, it condemns our anger. Right? Let me just show you some of these. Proverbs 29:11, fools give full vent to their rage. The wise bring calm in the end. You give vent to your rage, you feel something and you give full vent to it, that's foolish. That's what fools do. Right? That's not wise. This is what Proverbs is telling us. Proverbs 29, verse 8. Mockers stir up a city, but the wise turn away anger. They turn from anger themselves, and they also calm anger in others, right? That's wise. Proverbs 19:19. A hot-tempered person must pay the penalty. Rescue them, you'll have to do it again and again and again. Right? There's a consequence. And we all know that. You lose your temper, you lose your cool, you get angry. There's a consequence. Right? You try to help that person, and they're not learning, they're not changing. You have to do it again and again and again. In fact, that's why it says in Proverbs 22:24, do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered. Now, these are tough words. If you're an angry person, the Bible is telling me that I shouldn't be friends with you, that I shouldn't associate with you, and that if I'm an angry person, you shouldn't associate with me. Right? You try to rescue that person, you try to help that person, and they're not changing, you have to do it again and again and again. There is such a thing as righteous anger. Our anger never gets there. Right? That's why it says also in the New Testament, James 1:19 and 20, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, for man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. God's anger is righteous. There is that kind of anger. We feel it. We never quite reach it. Why is that? Let's just think about this a little bit more deeply and carefully. How is our anger? Where does our anger go wrong? Well, first of all, think about this. The causes of our anger. What makes me angry? Now, why is it that I get more angry when I'm in the line for the cash counter at Big Bazaar and somebody cuts in front of me? Why do I get more angry? Just to cite a recent example, by the way. Right? Why do I get more angry about that than I do about the fact that my maid's husband gets drunk and beats her up regularly? Why is it that this auntie coming inside, it's going to take another 2 minutes out of my life, right? It's not wrong. I mean, it's not right. It's not good. Right? Or this person cuts me off in traffic, or why does that incite so much anger? Right? Another human being who comes to my house to work every day is getting beaten, and who knows what all she goes through every night. This makes me angry, and this, maybe sometimes if I think about it a lot. Or why is it that I get more angry about someone taking the credit for the work that I've done at work? Right? I did the work, they're taking the credit, they're trying to, and getting it. They're getting all the recognition and maybe even the bonus and other things. Why does that make me more angry than the fact that there's people, children in my own neighborhood who are starving? And there's corrupt officials who are siphoning money that should go towards them and helping them. And they're taking it because they're greedy and corrupt. And I'm getting more angry about the fact that somebody else is taking credit for my work. Do you see what I'm saying? Right? There's something off. And by the way, if you just think about what I said earlier, anger is defending what you love. We're getting a hint, aren't we? What do I really love? Anger is actually an amazing gauge, very practically. What do I love? What is my heart passionate about? Right? Just see what you get angry about. Right? I'm passionate about my time. I'm passionate about my convenience. I'm passionate about recognition and applause for the work that I've done. Right? I'm a little passionate, a little concerned about injustice and poverty and abuse. The causes of our anger, they're always off. How is our anger not fully righteous? It's not just the causes of our anger, it's the proportion of our anger. Right? This was wrong. Some injustice has been done. Right? Something needs to be done. Something needs to be said. But wait a second. I am exploding. And I'm yelling and I'm screaming and I'm making a scene. And afterwards, I feel like a fool. And by the way, why is it that you feel like a fool afterwards? Because you were a fool. Right? That's why you feel like a fool, because you were a fool. And you think about it afterwards and you regret it. You say, well, I mean, something had to be said, something should have been done, but wow, that was something else. And that's always the case in our anger. It's always out of proportion, right, with the wrong that's been done in some way or another. And by the way, some of us blow up with anger. Some people, they don't blow up outwardly at least. They bottle it in. Right? And they might even feel, I don't have an anger problem. This message is not for me this morning. Right? But the anger is the same. The proportion and out of proportion is also the same. It's maybe your personality is different. You don't have that expression of the anger outwardly, but you just put it inside. Right? And in some ways, that's even worse, at least for you, because it lasts so much longer. And it festers and it maybe even grows. Days, months, years, maybe even decades. Causes of our anger, proportion of our anger, and one more, the goal of our anger. Anger, and this is where we see the destructive power of anger. Anger, when that switch flips and I lose it, what anger has a tendency to do is to pulverize, right? To annihilate, to destroy. Or at least to take revenge, to humiliate. And this is where we start getting at the solution to the problem of our anger. We focus on the person rather than the issue or the act. The goal: eliminate, destroy, pulverize, get rid of. Right? Our anger just goes off. And, which of course leads to a lot of other things. Proverbs 29, verse 22, an angry person stirs up conflict, and a hot-tempered person commits many sins. Right? You lose it at that moment, you're out of control, and anything can happen. You know that, right? You can say anything, you can do anything. Anger, that loss of control at that moment becomes the root of a whole lot of other things. Words are said, things are spoken, acts are committed, friendships are lost, close family members are separated, right? Jobs are lost, regret. And that's not even to mention, I was just reading actually about the physical health effects of anger. All of these consequences result. There is such a thing as righteous anger. Our anger is never fully righteous. Right? It always goes off in one way or another. And so how do we think about this? How do we manage this? What's the solution? There is a righteous anger. I know I never quite get there. I feel it. What am I supposed to do? The Bible tells us. It gives a very clear and really a very simple solution, right? That's extremely practical, right? You want to know what it is? What's the solution for our anger? It's this. Be slow to anger. That's what the Bible says. Be slow. Right? Do you remember James? I read this verse earlier. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And in fact, this is exactly what God says about himself. Right? This is one of the glories of God is he's describing himself. Right? Look at this example, Exodus 34, 5 and 6, and this comes up over and over again, this type of thing in the Bible, is God is talking about himself as the Bible is describing God. This is in the occasion of Moses, if you know this story, when God's glory passes by Moses, right? Look at what it says. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness and all those other things. In fact, we sang it this morning, didn't we? You're rich in love, you're slow to anger. Your name is great, your heart is kind, right? This is one of the glories of God, one of the best things about God. He is slow to anger. And this is what James tells us to do. Be slow to anger. And in fact, it's very interesting, if coming back to the book of Proverbs, the thing that is most often contrasted in the wisdom of Proverbs with anger, you know what it is? It's not calmness. It's not passivity. It's not forget about it. The thing that Proverbs contrasts anger with most often is patience. Right? Let me show you some of these. Proverbs 14:29. Whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly. The one who is patient has great understanding, as opposed to the one who is quick-tempered. Proverbs 15:18, a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. Proverbs 16:32, this is my favorite proverb, by the way, out of all this whole message. Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city. Better a patient person than a warrior. So powerful is patience. Better self-control than one who takes a whole city. Proverbs 12:16. Fools show their annoyance at once. The prudent overlook an insult. Right, again, the emphasis on the quickness, right? That spark of a response. Right? I feel it and immediately I'm doing something about it. Proverbs says, wait a second. A couple more. Proverbs 17:27. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint. Whoever has understanding is even-tempered. On the other hand, Proverbs 25:28. Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. Right? You don't have that patience. Right? It's like you don't have boundaries. Right? Like a city with walls that are broken down, that are ruined, that have holes in them. Everything's coming out everywhere. Be slow to anger is what the Bible says. Time. Simple thing. Talking about anger, time is key. Right? Just even removing yourself physically from the situation, right? Taking your time, understanding what's going on, right? That's what the Bible is talking about. That anger, that passion that you feel, something's wrong, something's unjust, something needs to be done. Something needs to be said. It's good, right? You take your time, you can respond appropriately, right? Not out of control, never out of control. So, finally, how do we manage our anger? Let's break it down very, very practically. How do we actually do this? And let me just say, before we start answering this question, that you can control your anger, okay? And in fact, not only can you control your anger, you do control your anger already. Did you know that? All of us. We are actually very good at controlling our anger. How do I know that? Because the way that we don't show anger when certain people are around. Right? If I was to come and sit in your living room couch and your husband, your wife, your kids say something, maybe even say something 10 times worse than they normally do, and would you just lose it? You know, if I'm sitting there, the pastor especially, right, sitting on your living room couch, I bet you will be very controlled in your anger. Right? And just think about this. Why is it that we mostly get angry with, our children, loved ones, or our subordinates? We rarely at least have that expression of anger against our elders, against a pastor, right, against our boss, some high-up person. Right? We actually do control our anger a lot already. Okay, just some help here. How do we manage our anger? First of all, admit your anger. And for many of us, this is the hardest thing. Right? You can't solve the problem first unless you admit it. You realize it. I remember a few years ago, we were at this couples retreat, my wife and I, and the speaker asked us to write down 5 weaknesses that you see in your spouse. That's a dangerous exercise. 5 weaknesses that you see in your spouse. And Carissa, my wife, wrote down, much to my surprise, anger. Anger in me? What? This is making me angry, right? Unbelievable. Of all the things, anger? Some people even call me the cool pastor. This is not anger, this is frustration. Why does this person always say this or do this? Or very early in our marriage, we decided, Chris and I, frustration is anger, right? Call it whatever you want. It's angry. I'm irritated. I'm annoyed. Or some people, they justify, I'm a straight talker, right? I tell it like it is. I don't put up with nonsense, right? Some people can let the stuff pass. I don't let any rubbish pass, right? I'm emotional. Some people might say, you don't know my kids. You don't know my colleagues or my subordinates at work. Unless I get angry, nothing happens. And I doubt that, by the way. I think very often, especially I know in our homes, the children are just used to, they don't even hear it unless it's 100 decibels or more, right? Even that's why the TV has to be turned up so loud so they can even hear. Right? They're so used to yelling and screaming and everything else. However you want to justify it, defend it, or whatever. Right? First thing, if you want to control it, you want to manage, you have to admit it. Right? This is anger. I have it. I feel it. Right? The second thing, analyze your anger. Right? This is why we take a moment. Right? Even removing ourselves from the situation, like I said, counting to 10, even just taking 3 seconds of awkward silence in the midst of a situation or a conversation, it's worth it. Right? Before that's you can feel that blood pressure rising, and before that switch flips, right, just take a second. What is going on? Why am I getting so angry? Right? Why so worked up? Right? What is the cause? Now catch this, what am I defending right now? Right? If anger is defending what I love, what is it that I love so much that I'm about to go out of control over? Very often, we realize it's an idol in my life. It's something selfish. It's about me. It's not about the righteous anger that is angry about the corruption and the poverty and the injustice in the world. It's about my comfort. It's about my convenience. It's about my pride or the humiliation that I feel at this moment. Right? if you just stop and think about it for a second. Be slow to anger. And by the way, I said time is your friend when it comes to controlling anger. I think the other friend is logic. Right? Let's just think logically about this for a second. It helps. And now, third thing, very important, alter your anger. Right? There has been something wrong that's been said, something wrong that's been done. It is wrong. It's unjust, or whatever it might be. I feel that. Now, my job is to slowly, carefully, under control, is to now channel this rage, this passion that I feel inside of me. That's probably a good thing at this moment in the face of what's just happened. But now the key, and I hope you hear this, the key is not to get angry as we normally think about it and pulverize, destroy, annihilate. Right? It's to focus. It's to focus that in the best way, and that means not on the person. That's not going to help. It's on the issue. It's on the act. It's on the words that were spoken. It's on the thing that was done. Right? I need to correct it. I need to do something about it. Right? But I need to do it under control. Right? That's always going to be the best way. Right? So just a quick example. Kind of a classic example, maybe. You're a parent of a teenager. You're having a discussion. It escalates. Like, it turns into an argument, and now it's going beyond an argument. And your teenager, who thinks they know everything, right, starts telling you about how awful a parent you are and how you only make their life miserable and that you've never done anything for them and they hate you. And now you've got to respond. And there's probably a few ways that you could respond. One is you can get into it. Right? They are getting upset, they're getting angry, they're getting emotional, and they're spewing out all these teenager kind of stuff. And you just respond with, you get into a verbal boxing match. Right? You lash out at them. They lashed out at you, now you lash out at them. And you've got 30 or 40 years of experience doing this, more than them. You'll probably annihilate them and crush them, and you're probably bigger than them. Right? That's one option. Or another option is you feel so stunned and you feel so hurt. How could you possibly say that? You've done everything for this child, right? And you withdraw. Okay, that's another option. Say, forget it, it's done. I'm not talking. Right? A third way, right, and this is the way that I would commend, right, in this situation or a situation like it. You do not an annihilation. You don't drop the nuclear bomb, right, that destroys everything, pulverizes. Right? You do a surgical strike. This child is acting like an idiot, but I love this child with every fiber of my being, and I don't want to destroy this child. I don't want to humiliate this child. But I've got to do something about the idiocy inside the child. Something needs to be said. This misunderstanding needs to be corrected. These, whatever needs to be punished. Discipline needs to happen. And so I think for a second, right, and then I move, right, carefully, under control. Right? I can't just ignore it. Right? This passion, this rage, this anger, this is a good thing, but it needs to be focused. It needs to be channeled, right, in the right way that doesn't destroy, that actually takes care of the issue. not annihilating the person. Right? That's what I mean by alter your anger. But one last thing, right? There's still hurt. There's still pain. Right? Did you hear what this person said to me? Right? It was deeply offensive. What do I do with that? Right? And that's the last thing that we need to do with our anger. We admit it, analyze it, we alter it, we focus it, we channel it. What do we do with the hurt, the pain, the humiliation, the personal offense? You absorb it. The issue needs to be dealt with. The child needs to be corrected. Something needs to be said to the colleague. But I'm now removing the personal offense of this, right? And I'm absorbing into myself. You know, another word for this is forgiveness. And forgiveness is not just, oh, it's fine, whatever, I don't care. Right? Forgiveness acknowledges something's been done, pain has been caused. Instead of bottling it up inside myself and letting it fester with resentment and bitterness, and not returning that pain back to that other person in revenge, getting them back for what they did to me, I absorb it. I acknowledge the pain and I take it into myself. Your actions are wrong. In love, amazingly, in love, I'm going to correct you. I'm going to, as wisely as I can, correct this, take care of this, do something about this, say something about this, under control, take care of the issue. That's the best way to do it. The pain, the hurt, the humiliation, the offense, I'm going to absorb. It's not about me. How do you do that? How do you do that? The easiest thing is to lash out. They hurt you, you hurt them back. How do you absorb the pain that's been personally caused by the actions, the words of another person? Well, as far as I know, there's only one way. And that's when you remember that there's a person who absorbed your pain and who absorbed your sin on himself. Right? That's what Jesus is doing, right? As he hangs on the cross. God could have come. He could have annihilated you. All the evil, all the disobedience, all the rebellion, every wicked thought, every temper tantrum, every foolish word, every yelling and screaming that you regretted later, right? He could have easily just come and just wiped you out. Instead, what does he do? He does a surgical strike. He loves you, but he needs to correct and remove the sin inside of you. So he carefully, surgically removes that and absorbs it on himself. And that's what's happening as Jesus hangs on the cross. He's absorbing the wrath of God that you deserved, that I deserved. He takes it on himself. And in return, he says, Father, forgive them. And when you understand how much Jesus has forgiven you, how much he's absorbed for you, it changes you, doesn't it? It changes you. It really does. Especially, now I want you to hear this, okay? Every Sunday you come here, you basically get the same message, don't you? Or at least the ending is always the same. Right? It's always coming back to Jesus. It's always coming back to the cross. It doesn't matter what the topic is. Why? Because you keep hearing that message again and again and again and again. You read any page in this book, it's the same message. You come to any Sunday, any sermon, it's the same message. And as you understand it more deeply and deeply and deeper in your heart, and I know many people in our church, including myself, can testify to this, right? As that message, as that truth, as that love, as that understanding of what Jesus has done for me, as it gets deeper in my heart, it makes me calmer. Doesn't it? It makes me more peaceful. It actually makes me more patient. It actually makes me less of an angry person. It actually makes me less of a bitter person. It makes me more of a forgiving person, right? Maybe not overnight, rarely overnight, right? Over time, right? It's changing me. And now I can see these things a little bit more clearly. I can admit it. Before that switch flips, I can stop and think about it. Right? I can alter it. And ultimately, I can absorb it because Jesus absorbed much, much more for me. Why don't we bow our heads and close our eyes? And in a moment, we're going to go to the communion table. And this is exactly what we're going to remember. It's not just a tradition or a ritual. We're going to remember Jesus hanging on a cross, his body broken, his blood shed, absorbing for me the wrath of God that I deserve. But before we do that, let's just take a moment. Let's just analyze our own hearts. Where does this anger come from? What are the situations that I'm prone to anger? Why so much anger? What do I need to change? Let's just take a moment as we examine our own hearts, as ultimately as we remember what Jesus did on the cross for us. Let's just take a minute. Father God, we thank you so much that you loved us, that you didn't destroy us, that you didn't annihilate us, but that you came down for us and ultimately to die for us, to absorb all of the sin, all the suffering, all the shame, all the pain, all the judgment, the hot wrath of God that we deserved. You took it on yourself. You paid the ultimate penalty, Lord, because you loved us. You dealt with the problem and you loved us. Oh, Lord, help us in all the different situations that we face. Lord, we're weak. Help us to be slow to anger. Lord, help us to channel that anger, Lord, in a way that pleases you, that's wise for your glory. And now as we go to the communion table, as we take in this bread, as we drink this cup, Lord, I pray that it would be a vivid reminder of your sacrifice for us, that we take into ourselves, that gives us life. Lord, renew that life inside of us, even as we do this act now together through communion. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.